recorded.
Good evening, everybody. Pepe Soda here with our fifth session on historical figures in Air Force history. And tonight's book will be Alone at Dawn by Dan Schilling. It's about the most recent recipient of the Medal of Honor, John Chapman. It's an awesome book, incredible book about our battlefield airmen who have been the face of air power for the last 20 years. And we have incredibly fortunate to have with us the SEAC, a PJ and a teammate of John Chapman's, CZ Colon Lopez. And CZ, sir, can I have some opening comments from you?
Hey, Pepe, first of all, thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here tonight, and also to speak about John and the legacy that he left behind. But most importantly, want to give a shout out to Dan Schilling, who wrote the book along with Lori Chapman Longfritz. They did a great job capturing not only Chappie's life, but his actions and the deserving deeds that led to the upgrade to the Medal of Honor, which was no easy task. It came with a lot of conversation, a lot of bro hugs, a lot of bro conversations, very deep conversations about the reality of war. And I just look forward for the audience to be able to hear what Dano's got to say, but also look forward to, after the interview, to talk a little bit more about Chappie and what he meant to all of us. But to the team, it's an honor to be here with you this evening, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, CZ. Dano, sir, any open comments from you before we start the Q&A?
Yeah, I think so. Two things I'd like to share. First is mirroring what CZ had to say, a guy I've known a long time and have admired and respected for all of that time. And also you, Pepe, for reaching out and requesting this, and everybody who's listening. I'm really honored to be here. I think this project is a really valuable project, and I wish you the best of luck with it. But what I would like to lead off with is a perspective I think that people don't have of the Air Force. And that is this: if you're wearing an Air Force uniform right now and you're listening to this thing, you are probably pissing me off. And here's why. Because if you're in the Air Force, you are literally the most powerful force ever created on planet Earth in 4.5 billion years as a single entity. The reason you are is the Air Force owns 2/3 of the US nuclear triad. The Navy has a paltry third. We don't even trust the Army with nuclear weapons anymore. So when you combine that responsibility and that force, that lethality that is truly planetary changing, if worse came to worse, that makes you the most powerful force on the planet. You also have, if you've read this book that I co-authored with Lori, which is John's sister, you know that the deadliest individuals to walk a battlefield on the ground in the history of human warfare over 60,000 years are airmen. They're not SEALs, they're not Green Berets. There's nothing wrong with those communities, but they're not the most lethal people to walk a battlefield. So when you combine those two things and you think about the other capabilities that came from the Air Force and now the Space Force, the satellites, the management of airlift and delivery and humanitarian requirements that are so prominent today in the world, it's the Air Force, and we don't act like it. So on the heels of writing Alone at Dawn, what I came to realize one of my purposes in my public life was to change the public's view of the entire US Air Force with a book and soon hopefully a movie. So I'd like to just set that as a perspective for you, because you should act like you are the deadliest and most powerful force in history. That's what I would share with that. Pepe, over to you. You can throw a dart at my chest or
No, Dano, perfect words, sir. And actually, you answered my question. My first question is, what motivated you to write the book? And that pretty much tells it right there. Unless you have any more words on what motivated you to write the book about John Chapman.
I didn't really want to write that book. I retired after 31 years to Utah, and it's snowing outside my window right now. so I could ski, hang out with my wife, and write novels, which is really what I was doing. And the book came to me through another combat controller, a guy that CC and I will both know, which is Kyle Stambro, who said, listen, this is this thing underway. John's sister wants to write a book, and would you be willing to talk about that or help? And I said, no, but I'll talk to her and I'll offer some advice on how to get a book deal and how a nonfiction book works. And then so she and I talked, and I wished her the best of luck, and I didn't sleep for 2 weeks because I realized I needed to write this book. I knew all the guys involved. I knew the Delta Force guys and the SEALs. I knew John not well, but I knew all the other combat controllers involved. And I realized the story that needed to be told wasn't John's life. It was John's life and this force no one knew of, which is combat control. And people in the Air Force today still, there are people who have no idea who this is, but everybody in the Navy who knows who a SEAL is. And I felt like I had to do this. So I spent 2.5 years writing the book, and you've got the result.
So who was John Chapman?
I would characterize John this way. John was this remarkably empathetic and humanistic individual. He valued people, and he had a set of, I think, morals and ethics that drove everything he did in his life. He was incredibly humble, and he was not somebody who sought glory in any sense. He was the state where he came from, their #1 diver, and he had all, competitive high school pool diver. And he just you never picked up these things from him, that he wanted to go be a badass. But what I think made him such a remarkable combat controller, and I think that's a synonym for badass, was the desire to prove himself against these standards, which are just absolutely extreme in every sense. And he found his way into a community, as many of us did, that allowed you to advance yourself and evolve through these types of expectations and standards. And who he was on that mountain, you have to realize this was really his first and last gunfight in a real sense. He'd been out in combat, done patrols, but this was his first real combat. And what allowed him to step up, he wasn't courageous in and of itself. He was this amazingly resilient person. And that was the well that he drew on to become the hero that we all recognize, because it was his courage that came from his resilience and who he was that allowed him to accomplish what he did so selflessly.
There's another hero on that mountaintop, Senior Airman Jason Cunningham. Tell us a little bit about Jason.
Yeah, so Jason, obviously he's in the book, but more has been written about him in other areas. He epitomizes the PJ motto that others may live. I mean, everything about him on that mountain was in service to the other people who were already in trouble. And his Air Force Cross was just absolutely deserved, because he didn't just lay down his life. He saved all these others, and he just provided this umbrella of protection for the people around him. And it's like John, it's astounding the amount of courage and fortitude this guy displayed. It's remarkable.
Unless you're not in a family, most of us know about the 24th STS, who you call, rightfully call one of the deadliest and least known force in history of human warfare. Why are they not as well known as DevGru or as Delta? Why aren't we talking about them more as the force they are?
Well, first of all, in the public world, which is where most of these types of narrative takes place, it's Hollywood, or it's streaming video services, or it's book, which is also popular medias. They're well-trodden tropes. I mean, the SEAL and the Green Beret. But the other thing that puts our airmen at a disadvantage for getting the due from the public that they should receive is the fact that if I'm working with Delta Force and they go out and kill Uday and Qusay Hussein, Saddam Hussein's sons, which they did, except they didn't. The guy who killed those two guys was a guy named Mike, that CZ and I both know. It is not in Delta's interest to go, we went to get these guys, but the Air Force dude really killed them. That's not a good public message. You don't do that in PR 101. You talk about what you are. And because we're integrated into those organizations and we are this key component, we tend to get pushed aside in the narrative. And that's okay for those units. That they're doing what they should do. My job is to rectify that for Air Force combat control, because even pararescue in the Air Force, everyone knows about PJs. They go save the good guys whenever something bad happens. That's an easy narrative. But when you talk about combat control, it's this very integrated, complex capability that doesn't lend itself to a soundbite. And so for me, the challenge as an author and a guy who did this for 31 years was how best to present that to people. And that's really in the book. But it's those reasons that put the 24th Special Tactics Squadron in the shadows. And I like to tell people on that pantheon of Black Special Operations Forces, these guys and girls who stand shoulder to shoulder with their Army and Navy counterparts are at least as capable, but certainly deadlier, in my opinion, which don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the U.S. Air Force.
Your book is pretty tough on the overall plan of Anaconda. What would you have done differently if you had been in charge?
That's a difficult question because in retrospect, all of us would do something different when things go wrong. So, the armchair quarterback, something I try and stay away from. But I'll answer that question this way. I think there were people in leadership positions on the ground there running things who knew what to do and how to do them correctly. Exhibit A is Pete Blaber. Pete was a Delta commander. He was running the behind. There's lots of stuff in all these books. Nothing I'm talking about is really classified anymore. But he had a sound planning methodology and game plan for how to employ forces behind the enemy lines. And he had been working on this for quite some time. And it involved Delta Force and the 2-4 STS in the form of combat controllers. And much of this is in the book, and much of it's in his book, The Mission Men and Me. But he knew what not to do. You don't use helicopters to insert people behind enemy lines, because when you do, everybody knows where you have landed your troops. And so these are the kinds of, I think, mistakes that were made in the interest of rushing into the battle space by other units. And I think people would have benefited from, at the time, from listening greater to that guy on the ground. In this case, it was Pete, but it could be any man or woman who's got this responsibility. When you're forward, the key here is to listen to the expert who is on the ground and has been there for a while, making the plan and executing it. And this is where things started to go sideways, and they went sideways very fast, as they always do in combat when you make a critical tactical error. And most of the errors here took place tactically. I didn't think the campaign itself was a good concept, but it was planned by the big army using conventional forces and planning methods. And you should talk to a conventional army guy if you want an analysis of that. I'm not that guy.
Yeah, I actually sat in a debrief afterwards in DC, and a lack of IPB was something they all admitted that they had a problem with when they went to the Valley. So,
but that happens. To be fair to the people in that situation at that time, that's always the case. My experience with combat and sophisticated and integrated joint special ops is you never have the IPB you want. You never have all the intel you want. You never have all the forces you want. We'll talk about Black Hawk Down, I'm sure, because people normally ask me about that. But there's a lot of that went into that same mission. Gunships, no gunships. What did that really? What would that have been decisive? Is a great after action, but at the time it was a foregone conclusion because they weren't going to give us gunships anyway. The answer was no.
In your book, you said, I quote, "The SEALs, like everyone else on the battlefield, fought strictly in 2D, but John didn't think that way, nor could he have for the luxury luxury of simplicity. His world was ruled by 3 axes, not 2. Is it to say he had that perspective because he was an airman, or is that just the STS combat control perspective of multiple axes of attacks on a 3D battlefield?
It's actually a combat control perspective. And here's a way to make sense of that so people can understand. And I actually believe that combat controllers experience combat in 4 dimensions, not 3. And this was a revelation for me in the course of writing this book. I'd never realized that I was also one of these guys, because my experience with combat and operations were my own experiences. Everybody's experience in a combat or traumatic environment or event is personal. And so you only ever have your own perspective. But one of the things I realized in the course of the book was, if we're in a gunfight, Pepe, say you're a Green Beret and I'm a combat controller, and we're in this gunfight together, and it's a good gunfight. We're doing what we need to. We're rolling on the objective. Things are happening. You think in 2 dimensions, because you think near and far and left and right, because your whole experience in a gunfight is a 2-dimensional kinetic connection between your gun and the bad guy. And so it's always, even if they're on higher ground, it's a 2-dimensional surface game for you. A combat controller walking onto the battlefield is immediately thinking in those 2 dimensions and high and low. So that 3rd dimension of space, and particularly as it applies to airspace, and applying that airspace power to that piece on the ground. But the other component that matters to that guy or girl, as women come into combat control, is the ability to incorporate the 4th dimension. How much time do I have with the aircraft? When are they going to get here? You know, when are the replacements going to come? You are constantly thinking in these 4 dimensions. Everybody else is just in a gunfight, and the gunfight takes as long as it takes. But that combat controller is holding the bag that has everyone's life in it. And if he doesn't understand all 4 dimensions, and by the way, every call sign, the capabilities of those US and allied aircraft, the munitions that they're carrying, their limitations and capabilities, everybody dies or everybody lives. That is an immense amount of power and responsibility to put on a lone airman. And I take great pride in the men and women who are doing this in the future, because they do it better than I did 30 years ago. But for that reason, we owe them this great debt of recognition, and they don't get it. And I would like to change that. But that's why they think differently than other people on the battlefield. And it's just a byproduct of what we train into them and why they're so good. And by the way, one of the things I stay away from, I don't call them battlefield airmen. I call them combat controllers, or I call them TAC-Ps, or I call them PJs, or I call them what they are. Because to me, a JTAC, which is that capability, is just another certification. There's big differences between a SEAL can be a JTAC, but he'll never be a combat controller, because that combat controller is more versatile than a SEAL. It's just the way it is.
You think that was part of the issue with the planning process, that you guys see things multidimensionally, but the SEALs and our command structure was pretty much 2-dimensional?
No, because I think people are used to planning. These are well-trained people in their own disciplines. So they're smart men and women. And this is early in the war. So a lot of people rolling into this equation didn't have a lot of combat experience either. Don't kid yourself. The SEALs planning these missions didn't have a lot of combat experience at that time. That unit has now, since over 20 years of warfare, developed a lot of experience and this wealth of collective knowledge. But at the time, there were a lot of people that were rolling into battlefields and hadn't been doing what they had done before. That's very apparent with the SEALs who were planning these missions, because it went sideways for a number of reasons, you know, and they had 2 other teams out there at the same time. And I'm not really interested in talking about what the SEALs did wrong, but one of those teams did not make the objective and was extracted early because they hadn't had the time or the training specifically to this type of environment to be successful. So they had to pull them out. The Army guys had been training for this specifically for a while, and then tailored that training experience to the reality of the battlefield they were on in preparation for Operation Anaconda. So the Delta Force guys who went out there all were successful based on that. And I think that's a testament to that unit. I'm a big fan of that unit. And I'm honored to have spent most of my career traipsing around the world with some of those people. And the same with the SEALs. I love Dev Group. It's a great unit full of a lot of amazing heroes. And I'm fortunate that sometimes even now I get to do some training with those guys. But, I wouldn't take those units over the 2-4 SDS. It's the most remarkable unit you've never heard of.
What got me was the title book was Alone at Dawn. As I read the book, I realized that our combat controllers are basically working in 1 or 2 man teams by themselves on different parts of mountaintops in Afghanistan. What kind of mentality and emotional IQ you have to be able to sit there by yourself pretty much at radios, see a lot of things go bad in front of you, and kind of provide your own security. That's amount of personal courage, I think, just to pull that off to begin with. How do you guys train to that kind of to work by yourselves in that kind of environment?
Well, every great combat controller I've known all have one trait in common. They're all very intellectually curious people. And so they're always thinking and learning. But the real problem, and I alluded to this earlier, and I'll come back and answer that question more fully, is, you know, when you win, the whole team wins. Oh, the combat controller called in these airstrikes, killed all the bad guys. Yay, team. I was with some Australian SAS guys and we're all happy. If you drop one bomb in the wrong spot, immediately they're like, the Air Force guy did that. The Air Force guy is the guy who made the mistake. So you win as a team, but you lose as an individual and you're left holding that bag. That also manifests itself in interesting social ways when you integrate with somebody else's team. Because the first thing that has to happen is you have to subordinate your ego to that group's culture. And there's big culture differences between SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, Australian SAS, British SAS, Norwegian Kriegsmarines, like all people that I've worked with, they are very different cultures. And you have to integrate and subordinate your ego, but integrate socially into somebody else's fabric very quickly. Because if you don't, they're going to start to ostracize you or sideline you. And it's this very complex sort of Japanese kabuki dance that you have to do. You have to perform high enough to do everything everybody else does there, or they're going to go, oh, the Air Force guy can't keep up. But you don't want to be the #1 guy, because if you do, they put a crosshair on your back because, oh, the Air Force guy thinks he's better than the rest of us. So you have to live in this space of performance and integration that is constantly changing in any situation. So they might not even want you. You show up at somebody's team, they're like, we don't need some Air Force guy. What do we need you for? We can call in bombs, no problem. But they can't, not like you. And you have to prove yourself to these people. It's a really interesting dynamic. And I've learned in my next careers and the other things that I've done, and whatever success I may have had, whether it's writing books or making movies or, you know, like base jumping and the things I've done here and there, I realized that these traits I learned from my time in the Air Force on how to integrate with somebody else into their culture is hugely beneficial. And it makes you a more evolved person. It doesn't make you better than other people, but it forces you to evolve in a way that's healthy.
Yeah, I remember first coming with the teams back in '85. It's a different environment and mentality. And your book, you really kind of point that out on how different. It's just a really different group of people that do that
It's
kind
a
of
different group of people.
Yeah.
It's not all of that is good, by the way. I mean, there's cultural things that come with that are realities. And all of us that are in the Air Force, and I'm imagining that most people here that are listening are part of the Air Force. You know, part of those cultures that come that you want to be a part of, but you also have to guard against excessiveness, drinking culture, you know, and everybody going out to do whatever you're going to do as a group, peer pressure. Those are all realities, and we all deal with those. And just because, you know, when I went through my training pipeline, 150 guys started, and 2 years later there was 6 of us. It's like a 4% success rate. Just because you did those kinds of things and maybe you could ascend to that type of capability or metric, you're still subject to the same social dynamics and pressures as everybody else. We're all just people at the end of the day.
Yeah. Jenny, got some questions in the field?
Yeah, I have one question from Mr. Steve Spears who would like to ask it.
Hi, this is Whitey Spears from Air Force Test and Evaluation. Just wondering, from a fighter background, has the fact that combat controllers have remained the quiet professionals, do you think that's helped them maintain the fact that they're the masters of their craft, that the fact that they're not in the limelight? Over.
I do. That's a great question, Steve. And I think it has served us well to date, but it's a double-edged sword. If you're competing for the same pool of men and women to make them combat controllers, and that 18 or 22-year-old college freshman or senior, whoever he or she is, don't know who you are, you're not going to get them if you want the best. So we're competing for a finite pool of people that the Army and Navy and Marine Corps and Coast Guard and even Space Force and who knows what else are out there. And it has not served us well to not transmit that message. And whether I have the right to do this or not, I don't know, but I feel I have the obligation to be that unofficial voice for this community to get the word out. But I do think, to your point, and as a test and evaluation guy, probably you're sitting in Nellis right now or in Las Vegas, that it allows us, because we don't project so much ego out in front of us as the way some other special ops communities do, we're easier to work with, and we tend to integrate better. And it goes back to what I was talking about. So I think it has served us well with the fighter community, because there's another community with a fair amount of ego power, in my experience. Hopefully that answers the question.
It does. Thanks. And thanks for telling their story for them. I appreciate it.
To kind of go along with that, Miss Ellen Noble asked, is that cultural integration with other elite groups part of the CCT training pipeline, or is that something that's learned and brought in through mentorship during your career?
It's a great question, and the answer is sink or swim. It is not part of your training pipeline. It's something you figure out very quickly, or you don't do it well at first, and then you have to figure it out very quickly. It's a really great question. I think it's something that would be beneficial to have some more of that type of training. So like the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School does a lot of cultural attuning type training, and we send people to those sorts of courses, and everybody does in AFSOC. And even I got a friend who's an F-15 pilot. He's a Strike Eagle guy over in Korea, and he just went to the SOS school for some of that training. You don't really get it. You have to figure it out for yourself. And some people are better at that, and some people are not good at that. And the best combat controllers are all very good at that. You can be a good combat controller and not good at that, but you're not going to be as effective because you have to be able to get along with people. At the end of the day, everything that we engage in, from combat to humanitarian missions, are all human relationships 100% of the time. Everything that you do, even your relationship with the enemy, is a human to human relationship. If you don't study those people, if you don't understand their culture, it's not just about their tactics or their capabilities. If you don't understand that human component, you will not be successful, or at least as successful as you could be. And in that space of success to most successful, lives are lost. And if we're in the Air Force, which all of us here are, man, you are dealing with people's lives.
That's a great point, Dano, because one thing I saw in this last 20-year war was in the Cold War, we had Soviet awareness teams and, Chinese awareness teams about, a day in a life of a Chinese pilot or something like that. 20 years of war, that we had nothing about, the guys who are fighting against in Afghanistan and Iraq, about the cultural aspects of who they were. There were no classes or guys going out from DIA or NASIC talking about, here's your Al-Qaeda guy, here's your ISIS guy. We did not understand. It was more whack-a-mole, hidden tangos, than it was understanding who your enemy was and what motivated him. And that's probably a failure from the intel side of the house. We're not pushing that kind of training out. But to me, I started lacking understanding what an enemy, who he really was, and what motivated him. That was kind of lost, I think, from an intel perspective at a national level, what we're going against.
Well, I think those shortcomings that you've identified are one of the good outcomes to come out of a campaign, a sideshow, which is what I call Afghanistan. The U.S. was really focused on this very small country that isn't a big player on the world stage, which is where the existential problems exist, that what you can wipe out the world. And I think we recognize that through that immersion, and that in the significant cultural differences with what we were dealing with, whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq or some of the other places that I spent time working Yemen or Somalia or Kenya, these places that I used to go wander around. Bangladesh, I spent a lot more time than I ever wanted to spend in Bangladesh. But you go around and you see these other cultures. Personally, I find it quite appealing to go find another culture that I have no experience with and really start to work with other people, because you find all the things that separate us and all the things that bring us together. And that is, there's so much value in that, in what we're doing. At the end of the day, in my opinion, the Air Force is a force for good in the world. It's one of the US's most capable forces for good around the world. And it comes back to the human equation. I think if we've learned our lessons well, the intel people that are listening in on this are doing a better job going forward, as you look forward where you're going to have to understand, than what we did in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Speaking of Afghanistan, Tucker Gar is probably some of the toughest terrain a force that I had to fight in. Can you talk about the terrain elevation of the battle space?
Yeah, it's remarkable. If you've seen the video I made to accompany the book, and you can go to Dan Schilling Books and you'll find it, or if you just Google First Medal of Honor, it'll populate on YouTube. One of the things that helps people understand just how vertical the terrain is, when you watch the SEALs when they're retreating, and John's still on the mountain and Neil Roberts are still on the mountain. So both the guys that are not going with them down the mountain, they're not walking down the mountain. They're not trudging down the mountain. They're sliding down the mountain. And this is, the top of Taker Gar, I think is 10,400 feet. It's right around there. This is March, early March in the war. And, John is trudging upslope to kill the bad guys in that first bunker in knee-deep snow at 10,000 feet in the dark. It's amazing. It's not just the ability that he ran up there to close with the enemy and killed these guys from a distance of no more than 10 feet. He did it running uphill in knee-deep snow at 10,000 feet, fully exposed to the enemy. It's an astounding display of commitment to what he felt he had to do. And all the mountains around there. So Jay Hill, another former teammate of CZ and I, who was truly, at the end of the day, the foremost witness to John's surviving having been left for dead. He was on another hilltop 3 kilometers away with some Delta Force operators getting ready to call in airstrikes, which he successfully did for the next 4 days straight without sleep. Man, he's like, there's no way anybody could have gotten over there on foot to affect that gunfight, because it would literally take you a whole day to climb to the top of that mountain. That's how steep the terrain was, and that's the conditions they were in. Sub-freezing temperatures, of course, as well. So it's remarkable. And, just to talk about John's fortitude for a moment, I put it this way, I had access to all the information, the forensic pathology, John's original autopsy. I've had everything. This guy had 12 gunshot shrapnel wounds. His one of the first 2 rounds that hit him was fatal. He was in shock, blood loss. He was going to die unless he got immediate treatment, which clearly probably was never going to happen. But his ability to climb out of this bunker an hour later with all that blood loss and shock and all those other wounds, to include the lacerations from hand-to-hand combat, and still be able to function right until the point he got shot through the heart. I don't have any idea how he could possibly have done that, but he did. And it wasn't just adrenaline. The adrenaline surge came and went. He was up there for nearly an hour by himself. Anyone who's been in a gunfight or been in these types of austere environments and conditions will tell you, your adrenaline doesn't keep pumping nonstop. There's the cortisol and the other things that come out that suppress your emotions and other things. They may contribute, but the fact is, the sheer blood loss alone, I can't believe he could even function. It's the most amazing story of perseverance that I've ever been personally involved with. And I've been involved with some pretty significant, gunfight experience.
Wow. Awesome. Jenny, got a new question coming in?
Yep, we have another question from Glenn Carroll, one of our listeners.
Yes, sir. Gee, Mr. Schilling, I appreciate you writing the book, and I really was absorbed by the whole thing. And like you said, it's an unknown task. It's great to see the exposure you're given to these men that have carried on in these teams. One of the things in reading it and getting into the midst and the hardcore part of the battle, one of the things I'm thinking about is you've got all these teams and they're all interspersed in this area. Everybody's calling in for their support. I don't know if they have certain assets assigned to them, but I know there's priorities where all of a sudden you need any assets you can get. How did those controllers in these separate teams interact with one another to prioritize and share that? That is, to me, a whole nother level of complication beyond what you're trying to survive in your own team. That's amazing. How do they deal with such as that?
Glenn, that is a brilliant question. And it's actually to the heart of what differentiates a combat controller from everybody else in the battlefield. Their ability to self-initiate and establish an informal network amongst themselves happens everywhere we go. I know you're there, or if I didn't know you were there, I will once we start talking, because there's the court, and we don't want to bog down in all the CFAC and all the other coordination stuff, which has all changed anyway. But how those air assets get allocated, what happens is they're a self-establishing network that happens informally on the ground through radio nets or HPW back then. But the fact is we start talking amongst each other, and we'll start to deconflict things and coordinate things for, hey, who's the priority here? So, and I've done this personally in Somalia, the Operation Gothic Serpent, which you would probably know as Black Hawk Down. There was a couple other combat controllers out there. There was 4 of us out in the battle space. And as I'm doing stuff with the Rangers and the convoy where we're getting shredded pretty bad, I was not taking airstrike capability away from what I thought was a more dire situation, which was Jeff Bray, X number of blocks away, who was stuck at a fixed point. So what we do is, it's this amazing capability to start to coordinate. And even the leaders at the strategic level and the leaders who have operational control of these battlefields have no idea that combat controllers do this. All they really know is this magic happens, and these guys can do things that other people can't. And in the aftermath, it never gets caught up in the after action report. They don't really ever know why some of these things that happen behind the scenes happened. And there are many people doing many things in a battlefield. But what happens when it comes to the air power is these guys all communicate with each other. And it's a remarkable thing to see. And it's an even more remarkable thing to have been a part of. And
I hope no one ever finds out they're doing that, because obviously, like what happens with all these, once administration gets involved, they want to be involved. Almost the least they know about what these men do as a team, in a way, could be a good thing, it seems.
Well, it's just like having drone capabilities over a battlefield. It's a blessing and a curse. For the people on the battlefield, in some ways it's a blessing, but at the leadership level, they think they're looking through the straw and they know exactly what's going on that mountain, and they do not, I can tell you. And so leadership tries to assert itself often, not always, but it's a trap that leaders can fall into. And, drones are just another one of those. I don't think anybody's ever going to fall victim to overvaluing combat controllers, though. That's not a fate that's going to happen to us. But I'm trying to fix that. I hope. I don't know. We'll see.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Actually, that question is a good segue to my next question for you, Dano. And that was one of my favorite lines from the book is, and I'll quote you, the younger it got, less likely he was to be shooting. It was a controller way. When everyone else fired, he'd be on the radio that much more. He and his radio were the last line of defense for the guys on the hill. How do you maintain that type of discipline? I remember in Myers Sharif talking to Matt Leinert, and he was on a radio calling airstrikes with RPGs going around him. And he's so calm, and it's just amazing. How do you guys get in the zone or something? Or
Well, those are two separate questions, I think, or topics. Your ability to focus on a task is different than whether I should be shooting or not. They're related, but really to answer the latter one first, you know, and you see it over time, like GZ, Bob Gutierrez, who, by the way, should receive a Medal of Honor. And it pisses me off that the Air Force has not pushed his story forward the way that they should, because the Air Force is its own worst enemy when it comes to this. But you hear him recording with a shot lung, and he's on the radio and he's just talking calmer than I am, saying, here's what I have to have. This is my priority. When can you get me my bombs? That's a product of training. You know, so when you start to do that, you do get into a zone because you've practiced it over and over again. Now, that's different than when things go bad. Am I going to be shooting my gun? As a combat controller, if things are really bad, I should be on the radio, because so I'm going to put my gun down and get on the radio, because I can kill more bad guys with my radio and one great Air Force airplane than everybody else on the battlefield, if I'm good enough and if I've got that asset. The first time I ran out of ammunition in a big gunfight was the last time I ran out of ammunition in a gunfight. But my reasoning was to the heart of your question. I only carried so many magazines because I already carried more weight than everybody else on the battlefield. That's the other burden as a combat controller. You carry all this comm gear. It has to work. You can't run out of batteries. Food, water, warmies all take a backseat to batteries and radios and other electronic devices. So my reasoning was, okay, when things go bad, I'll only need X number of magazines. When I ran out of ammo, I was like, that was not a good plan. But in general terms, when things go bad, you guys that I'm supporting or integrated with are going to be laying out small arms fire. I'm going to be on the radio calling in that 540 knot airstrike pass from a Strike Eagle.
Tough part of the book for me to read was the last couple of the chapters on the battle and John's last hours alive. It was tough to read. How tough was it for you to write those chapters?
So I get flown around the country to talk about resilience and culture a lot, and the creative process. People just do that. And so when I talk about resilience, I talk about the kind of things that are healthy and the things that are not healthy. And I'll tell you, for me, I really struggled with that. I spent about a week writing John's last minutes of his life. It was very important to me that I do John's sacrifice and his loss justice, and that it be as accurate as possible. I, of course, cannot say what John felt, but I can say what he decided because his actions show me what he did. And I spent a week on that, and I'm not going to lie to you. This is back. I still struggle with PTSD. I still have issues with things both that I have done and things that I have witnessed. And I would just go out and I would write for a while, and I would just go out and rage. I live on a mountain at 8,500 feet. I would just go out and rage against the mountain for a week. And it left me pretty devastated. I don't think I could write another book like this again. I'm glad I did, but it's a very difficult thing to do that and try and carry that burden for somebody else with the right dignity, I guess maybe would be the right word. But I hopefully it had an impact on people when they read it, because that was also my intent deliberately.
No, I tell you, it was a tough chapter to get through at the end. I mean, I had a hard time just going through each page, know what's going to happen at the end, just hard to see what's going to happen. So I'm excited to see what the movie's going to show. I hope it shows the script stays with the book. It's my hope for you.
Yeah, the movie's a whole nother thing. I skulk around Hollywood sometimes now, or they invite me down there. It's an interesting place to hang out. If you want to understand the human ego, go to Hollywood.
So as we start talking about the Medal of Honor, a lot of work from a lot of people went into that. What initiated the upgrade from the Air Force Cross to Medal of Honor? Was that some of the 24th? Some of you did, you got your teammates did, or what was the genesis of that movement?
It's the power of the pen. John's Medal of Honor can be traced directly back to a Stars and Stripes article.
Wow.
That's the power of writing things. And Deborah James, who I adore, I think she's a great human. I consider her a friend. She was the Secretary of the Air Force at the time. This came to her attention because there was an article. What does it take for an airman to get a Medal of Honor? And I will tell you, in my opinion, as a subject matter expert now on this topic, there are 3 Medals of Honor for the Air Force that should have come out of Afghanistan. John Chapman is just but one. That's neither here nor there. But what happened is she initiated a query. Hey, this is an interesting article. Why are we missing something? Should we look into this? Because is the Air Force using different standards than the other services? The answer to that question, by the way, is yes. And so what should we do to look into this? Doesn't mean we're going to get a Medal of Honor. It's not about getting them. It's about whether someone has earned this. And that kickstarted this. And where most of it landed, of course, was AFHF, because Air Force Special Operations Command was the place where people were on the ground getting it on. And the supporting elements to that, from air power standpoint, the courageous gunship crews and a Taker Gar, DJ Turner and his crew that stayed on after sunrise, basically turned off their radios to ignore the order to return to base just so they could stay above what was happening on the battlefield. I mean, there's a lot of courage there. This is what generated the interest and the reinvestigation. And actually, there hadn't really been an investigation before into what happened with John on the mountain. And the rest is in the book, and it's in some other books, but it's, a bureaucracy takes over at that point, and that's a very different animal to deal with.
We got a question from the field, Jen?
We do. So first, Bobby Oates just wants to say thank you for telling the story. Even with 23 years in the Air Force, didn't know about combat controllers. So again, just a thanks for getting that story out there and the awareness of what the combat controllers do. And then Autumn Carr has a question for you. She's going to come up and ask. Oh. Possibly. Give it another second.
We'll just all stare at each other awkwardly, no problem.
Yes. All right. The question is, what is your takeaway message of resiliency as you travel and talk to people?
Well, it normally takes me about 2 hours to cover that topic. So 20 seconds, I'll do my best. I would say it is best summed up in a word. And actually, this is coming this way because I don't really do it this succinctly. And that is vulnerability. That's 2 words. It's vulnerability and love. Vulnerability is really your willingness and taking the risk to share whatever it is your trauma is and your recovery requirements are on your journey to well-being. Everyone's willing to be somebody else's teammate. Jen, you can tell me your story, your problem, and I'd listen to it all day long. And I'm like, yeah, I'm here for you. And that's great. You know what I'm mostly not likely to do? Share my story back with you, because I'm afraid to share myself, especially if you're a type A action guy like me. My God, that's the worst thing you could do. But it's the only way you will find recovery. And the other thing, and I talk about this a lot. I didn't used to share these stories, but I realized I have a responsibility to talk about my own story. Man, it's love. Love saved my life. My wife is a big part of why I am alive. And the other things that helped me a lot was finding a philosophy that allowed me to process the things I'd done and see. And the other thing that really, believe it or not, that saved my life was a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. That book, and this isn't hyperbole, that book helped save my life because it allowed me to understand why I did the things that I did and felt about them the way that I do. It goes back to the power of stories. Again, it's about how humans share stories, whether it's books or oral history or even making movies. Sharing that information is what allows you to do that. So I'd say it's those 2 words. There's a lot more to it than that. If there's more questions, I'd add them. But in the interest of everybody else, I'd say that's my short answer.
Dan, you fought in one incredible battle, the Battle of Mogadishu, and you've detailed read about Taka Gore. As you look at these 2 battles that are about the combat controls and PJs were both, very much a part of.
Absolutely.
What's your take from both battles?
Well, the parallels are a number. You know, the belief things would go a certain way, as happens in many gunfights. You know, the problem with gunfights is people never hold still when you shoot at them, right? And they don't do what you want them to do. And so, you know, things go sideways and unexpected things happen. Like they shoot down not one Black Hawk helicopter, but 4. They shot down 4 helicopters that day. That's a parallel with Taker Gar. Every helicopter that went to the mountain ended up getting shot down up there. And so, you know, and the necessity for things have gone sideways. This is where PJs and any medic or corpsman earns their living. Things have gone sideways. That's when they have to be there. And both of these, you know, you've got Jason Cunningham, we just talked about, but Tim Wilkinson, one of my best friends. I love that guy. Air Force Cross from Somalia. And the only reason Tim's alive today is when he was running across this intersection, which was positively Hollywood with the amount of RPGs and small arms fire, he runs so slow, I think the enemy was leading him too much. And that's the only reason he survived, because Tim does run that slow. And so, you know, here's another guy who saved 7 different lives, people who were gonna die for sure. And in the ability of combat controllers to do what they did. Jeff Bray, who's dead now, was another really good friend of mine and teammate. Man, he saved a lot of lives in Somalia. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest, it's not just the parallel between those two things. It's a constant in austere environments in combat, is that people will do anything for each other. I will risk my life to save you. I'll take risks for you, Pepe, that I won't even take for myself. And it's one of the great attributes of the human species, of which the human species has a lot of shortcomings too. But this is one of the good things about us.
Awesome. I got a couple of questions for you and CZ to kind of share. So is CZ back on the screen somewhere?
It's just his portrait. Maybe we can get him to show his real face.
No, I'm still here. I was sparing people the look.
For both of you, first, for both those questions for both of you guys, what is our takeaways about the performance of our special tactics personnel, both the PJs and combat controllers, the 20-year global war on terror, especially in Afghanistan, where you guys seem to be except for the face of air power, was the 24th, was the STS community. So CZ, you first. What do you take away from the performance of our airmen there?
Well, for the 20 years of war in both Afghanistan and Iraq, I believe that for our generation was the test ground for our skills and our validating the capabilities that we bring to the fight. I think, like Dan mentioned earlier, a lot of us were highly trained but not proven. And on the SEAL side, on the Special Forces, CAG, Delta side, I think a lot of us, were waiting for that big mission. Then September 11th happened, and then it was a continuous, roll back, rinse, repeat cycle of combat for a lot of us. But I think that is one of the biggest takeaways, that we really validated capabilities in there that were in theory supposed to work, and people just continue to evolve, just making the impossible possible and making it happen over and over again. Dano, over to you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Pepe for letting you go first, because you stole like half my answer, so I'm screwed. But that's okay. No, but to build on what CZ was talking about, I think what it really was an evolution accelerator. It accelerated so many things on the battlefield for all people involved in this, from logistics to intel. I will tell you, intel was a very underappreciated component, not just capability, but an integrated component into what we did before the war. You would get your brief and you kind of listen to it. Man, now the intel folks are rolling on objectives sometimes because they need to be there sometimes. And so, all these things that allow you to do what is more effective, it accelerated that. And, it's one of the things that postures the United States foremost in the world for any conflict to come. you symmetrically, you do not want to go toe to toe with the US because we're going to crush you. Therein comes the next Pearl Harbor or asymmetric warfare that we don't see coming, of which there will be something. And so, back to the heart of your question, you know, these people for the next 10 years, that will be hopefully training their successors to be better than they were, which is always our responsibility to the next generation. And I think the lasting legacy is it allowed American forces to prove themselves in a way they would not have had. The downside is the people that we lost, the thousands of American men and women we don't have. You know, of all the things I've done in my life, the only real regret I have is that I had to kill people in the course of my job. That bothers me. I'm a Buddhist and it's a thing for me. But the only other thing I would say that I would trade off for the hard-earned expertise and wisdom I've gained is the lives of the friends that I lost along the way. On Saturday, I am going out to the 30th anniversary, October 29th, 1992. We had a helicopter crash here in the Great Salt Lake. It was the 55th 60 crew. It had 2 Ranger Battalion commanders, a bunch of Rangers, and 4 combat controllers, all of whom were personal, good friends of mine. And, you know, we lost those guys. And I will be out there. I go out there every year. I don't really drink alcohol anymore, but I go out there and have a beer and open one up for these guys because that's the burden that we all carry in the course of doing what we have to do. And you will miss those people.
So I'll ask you this question first and CZ second. And that's that when I was researching books, this book's the only one to talk about our airmen in combat, especially our NCOs. Why are we not, as an Air Force, embracing and celebrating our NCOs' heroism more than just your book? I don't get that.
It's a cultural thing. It goes back to the establishment of the Air Force, in my opinion, in 1947 as a separate service, born of the Army Air Forces of World War II, and maybe even going back to, you know, World War I. But it's about the airplane, and it is still about the airplane in a cultural sense, in my opinion. And it's not that the leaders we have don't appreciate the enlisted people who do these hard jobs on the ground. The patrol, the refueler in the austere air base in Abuja, somewhere in Africa, like does not factor into the leadership of the Air Force or the combat controller or the TAC-P or the PJ. That doesn't happen. And so they don't value it for that reason. And I think it's not part of the narrative that gets them money on Capitol Hill, which is what drives a lot of things at the senior leader level, is how to protect your forces, resourcing, and the other things that really do matter, and the strategies that come along with this. Listen, by the fact that it's a small part of the Air Force. Combat control is 0.1% of the Air Force, 0.1% of the Air Force. But I find it unfortunate that 0.1% in America's longest running war was over 50% of its Silver Stars, 70% of its Air Force Crosses, and its only Medal of Honor. And they don't embrace it in the way that would help shape the Air Force's narrative. I don't know, that's my opinion. CZ's going to have he's going to be much more informed. I'll be interested to hear what he has to say.
CZ, over to you, sir.
Well, so Pepe, I mean, I have to agree with Dano. It's part of the Air Force culture. And I'll take it as far as this. I'm not a fan of the Air Force song. And you can pretty much imagine why. The Air Force, the Air Force song is all about the fighter pilot, nothing else. When you look at all of the other service songs, they talk about the troops on the ground. They encompass the entire team. Our song is the only one that speaks of one segment of our society. But, you know, one point that Dano made is what gets you money at Capitol Hill. Well, General Jumper, when he was the chief of staff of the Air Force, he capitalized on the actions of special tactics and the ground pounders that were fighting the war, because he ended up showcasing the value, and he really pushed forward the impact that the small segment of the population was doing. But if I were king for a day, and I'm probably going to get crucified for this, but I really don't care, is I will revisit, something that actually thanks every single one of you that is laying it on the line every day. The people that share the success of the United States Air Force and not just a fighter pilot. Over.
That was awesome. So my last question to CZ and to Dano, and I'll let go with CZ first so Dano can wrap it up. What are your final thoughts about John Chapman?
Well, so I met Chappie when I was fairly green into the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, and this is 1999. And very mellow mannered and the definition of a quiet professional. There were guys that were cocky. Chappie wasn't that guy. The last time I got to see Chappie was right before he deployed. As a matter of fact, I took the keys from him, checking into the apartment in Virginia Beach to assume alert when they took off downrange. And then, just a few weeks, if not months later, we got word that he had been killed. But that is who he was, and it really hit us hard. And I speak of Chappie because he was the first one. He was the first one that was killed in combat after a long, long time. I mean, Dano got to live through Gothic Serpent. A lot of us, used that mission as motivation, but we hadn't experienced it. And when Chappie got killed, it was just fueling the fire, man. Every single one that went back, it was just getting payback and payback and payback. I mean, my friends, on the CL side, Slab, Britt Slavinsky, Turbo, and Fifi, all three of them, we lost Fifi. That was also very hard for all of us. And, he had been, I believe at that point, the second SEAL that had been killed from the unit. But, Chappie's legacy is going to live. We got Val, we got Brianna, we got Madison. The living relatives, the DNA of John Chapman is walking around, but also the legacy that he lives for every single one of us, on the operator, on the spiritual side, is something that is going to be talked about for ages and ages and ages. And you can rest assured that we're not going to let that legacy die just because it doesn't have wings. That guy had horns, and you don't grab that bull by the horns. And the enemy got to see exactly what was coming when they poked him. So that is what I want people to remember about Chappie.
Dano, last word, sir.
I think that was so well articulated, CZ Manis. That was really well said. I would only add this as a coda to that. John represented the best tenets of both humanity and the Air Force. All that is good in the species and our force. He represented his humility, his dedication, and his capability, which are three distinct things. That's what I would close that with.
That was amazing. That was awesome. CJ, thank you for your time. See, I hope to see you in the building and grab coffee one day. Dano, brother, always a pleasure to see you in Southern Pines in a couple of weeks. But thank you for your time and your commitment to telling a story about the most deadliest Special Operations Force, within we all believe in the world today, 24th STS. So it's been a great session, and I know I'll talk to you guys that are on. For the book club people, next book we're talking about will be Hap Arnold. Will wrap up this year, only 5-star general we ever had. And that'll be sometime in December. We figure out the date pretty soon. But again, Dano and CZ, see you in the green room. Everybody else, thank you for a great show, and we'll talk later.
Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. It means a lot to me that you would have, the interest in hearing what not speaking for CZ, but thanks for having me, all of you. And thanks for continuing to be part of the Air Force. You guys are, remember, you're the deadliest sons of bitches on the planet. Don't ever forget that.
Awesome. All right, Jen, take us over.
Great job, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.